Alina Vance knew that hosting her weekend house parties was a delicate art. These were multi-day affairs, and her guests had to stay in the sprawling estate. She made it her mission to invite only the most talented and entertaining individuals. Some were chosen for their skill at card games, others for their flair for amateur dramatics, and a few for their ability to command the piano. After all, keeping a house full of people entertained for 3 or 4 days was a significant challenge. To this particular gathering, Alina invited Professor Julian Croft. The rumor was that he was a brilliant man, and his name certainly had a clever, academic ring to it. However, once he arrived, Alina couldn't for the life of her see what all the fuss was about. He was a man of very few words. One rainy afternoon, with all the guests cooped up in the grand living room, Professor Croft finally spoke up. "I have made," he announced to the room, "the single most important scientific breakthrough in the history of civilization. I have dedicated many years of my life to this singular problem." "And what is this fantastic discovery?" asked Mr. Harrison, another of Alina's guests, his tone dripping with skepticism. "I have taught animals to speak our language," explained the professor calmly. "Do you have an example of your work here with us?" asked Mr. Harrison, who clearly thought the man was a fraud. "Yes, I do. Alina's own cat, Jasper. Jasper is my most accomplished student," Professor Croft answered. "How can we possibly believe you," continued Mr. Harrison, "when you claim to have taught an animal to converse?" "Well," explained the professor patiently, "I have worked on this problem for many years, experimenting with thousands upon thousands of animals. 7 months ago, I began to focus on cats. They are the perfect subjects for my work. They live alongside us, yet they retain a wild, independent nature. And within the species, there are cats of superior intelligence. Jasper is one of these. In fact, he is a super cat. He is the first animal I have successfully taught to speak English perfectly." A heavy silence fell over the guests. They all looked at Professor Croft, certain he was either insane or a remarkable liar. Finally, after a long moment, Ms. Agnes Reed said, "I assume you mean you've taught Jasper to understand and respond to simple commands like, 'Come here' or 'Go away.' That is quite interesting." "No, no," said Professor Croft, his patience unwavering. "Young children learn short, simple sentences first, but Jasper is an exceptionally intelligent creature. I have taught him to speak the English language with complete fluency. His command of the language is as good as yours or mine." Now everyone was convinced Professor Croft was a charlatan. "I think we ought to see this cat for ourselves, and then we can pass judgment," suggested Alina Vance, the hostess. Mr. Harrison left the room to find the cat. The remaining guests began to whisper amongst themselves, concluding that Professor Croft must be a talented ventriloquist. They settled in, waiting for what they expected to be an amusing performance. A minute later, Mr. Harrison burst back into the room, his face pale and his eyes wide with shock. "It's true, it's absolutely true," he shouted. The other guests could see he was genuinely shaken and pressed him for details. "Well, I found Jasper sleeping on a chair in the smoking room," he stammered. "I told him he was needed in the living room immediately. He opened his eyes slowly, gave me a disdainful look, and then said, 'I'll come when it suits me. Now, please leave.' I nearly fainted on the spot. Suddenly, everyone believed Professor Croft. A barrage of questions was fired at him. He simply smiled, basking in the glow of his initial success. At that very moment, as if on cue, Jasper the cat strolled elegantly into the room. None of the guests dared to speak. They felt a strange sense of embarrassment in the presence of a talking cat. Finally, the hostess, Eleanor Vance, nervously broke the silence. "Would you care for some milk, Jasper?" "Yes, I am a bit thirsty, thank you," the cat replied in a clear, definite voice. Everyone in the room was stunned. Eleanor's hand trembled as she poured some milk into a saucer. "I'm so sorry. I seem to have spilled most of it on the carpet," she apologized. "I don't mind in the least," Jasper responded coolly. "It's not my carpet." The room was silent once more. Then Ms. Reed asked Jasper if he found it difficult to learn human speech. The cat looked at her for a long moment, then glanced out the window, making it perfectly clear he found her question utterly ridiculous. "What is your opinion of human intelligence?" asked Brenda Larson stupidly. "Human intelligence in general, or are you inquiring about a specific person?" Jasper asked, his tone sharp. "Well, my intelligence. What do you think of my intelligence?" Brenda asked with a nervous laugh. "You put me in a rather awkward position," said Jasper, though he looked anything but. "But since you ask, I will tell you." When Eleanor Vance was telling Mr. Harrison that she planned to invite you to this party, he said, "Brenda Larson is the most foolish woman in the world. Why on earth are you inviting her?" Eleanor replied, "My dear Harrison, I am inviting her precisely because she is foolish. I have an old car I need to sell, and Brenda Larson is the only person gullible enough to buy it." "MMMPH," Eleanor gasped, insisting that Jasper was a liar, but Brenda Larson didn't believe her. That very morning, she had purchased Eleanor's old, overpriced automobile. Colonel Miller tried to change the subject. "Jasper, why don't you tell us about your lady friend, the striped cat that lives near the stables?" Everyone immediately realized this was a terrible mistake. "It is hardly polite to inquire about one's private romantic affairs," replied Jasper coldly. "Would you like me to discuss what I have observed during this party? I'm quite certain you wouldn't enjoy that, would you?" A wave of collective panic swept through the room. Nearly every guest was hiding some secret dalliance or indiscretion. They all shared the same chilling thought: if Jasper says what he has seen, I will be ruined. Jasper's dinner was still 2 hours away, but Eleanor said, "Jasper, why don't you go ask the cook if your dinner might be ready early?" "Thank you," responded Jasper, "but I have just had milk." "I have no wish to die of indigestion." "But cats have 9 lives, Jasper," said Mr. Harrison, trying to make a joke. "Possibly," was the cat's reply, "but only 1 liver." "Eleanor, are you really going to allow this animal to gossip about us with the servants?" cried Mrs. Gable, another guest. The panic was now widespread. Everyone remembered that Jasper often prowled the grounds, walking silently past their bedroom windows. It was terrifyingly clear that he had seen and heard everything. Some guests turned white with fear. Others, like Arthur Finch, who was studying to be a minister, simply fled the room. They all thought, if Jasper reveals everything he knows, it will cause scandals of unimaginable proportions. Finally, Agnes Reed said dramatically, "Why did I ever come to this wretched house party?" Jasper had the answer. "I know precisely why you came. Only yesterday you were telling Mrs. Gable that Aliner's parties were dreadfully boring, but that the food was divine. You told her you only came for the excellent meals. In fact, you said that everyone came for the food." "That is not true. You are a liar," Agnes shrieked. "Mrs. Gable, tell them the truth. Did I say that?" "Tell them then," Jasper continued calmly, turning to Mrs. Gable, what you said to Colonel Miller about what Agnes said. And he, in turn, said that Agnes Reed would go anywhere she could get a free meal. Fortunately for the horrified guests, Jasper's story was cut short. He had spotted his arch-nemesis, a large yellow tomcat in the garden. He shot out of the open window and gave chase. All the guests turned on Professor Croft, their faces a mask of fury. He had caused all this trouble. "Do you think Jasper will teach other cats to talk?" they demanded. "Is that possible?" "It is possible," replied the professor. "Perhaps he has already taught his girlfriend, the cat from the stables, but I doubt he has taught any others. At least, not yet." Mrs. Gable turned to the hostess. "Aliner, I know you and your husband are very fond of Jasper, but he and his stable cat friend must be destroyed." "I have not enjoyed this last half-hour either," said Aliner grimly. "Yes, it is true that my husband and I were very fond of Jasper. Well, we were before he learned to talk and spill our secrets. In any case, I agree. He must be eliminated as soon as possible." "We can put a fast-acting poison in his food," said Mr. Harrison, "and I will go down to the stables and drown the other one." "But what about my great discovery?" cried Professor Croft, his voice filled with emotion. "I have worked on this for so many years." "Why don't you go to the zoo?" sneered Mrs. Gable, "and teach the elephants to speak? Elephants are very intelligent creatures, but they do not hide under one's chair or listen outside one's bedroom window." Professor Croft tried to persuade them not to kill Jasper and destroy his life's work, but no one listened. In fact, many of the guests privately thought that a bit of poison should be put in the professor's food as well. That night at dinner, an oppressive silence hung over the table. Aliner tried to make conversation, but no one responded. They were all watching the serving dish meant for Jasper. Inside was a delicious piece of meat, laced with a lethal dose of poison. But Jasper did not return. After dinner, there was still no sign of the cat. A servant announced that the kitchen window had been left open as usual for him. 9 o'clock came and went. Then 10 o'clock. Still no Jasper. At 11, one of the guests stood up to go to bed. Before leaving the room, he said darkly, "Jasper has probably gone to the local newspaper to sell everything he has seen and heard at this house party." Good night. It was not a good night for anyone. The next morning, every guest asked the servants the same question, and every servant gave the same answer. No, Jasper has not returned. Breakfast was even more depressing than dinner had been. But before the meal was over, the gardener walked into the dining room carrying Jasper's lifeless body. His enemy, that big yellow tomcat from the farm, finally got him, the gardener explained. Jasper was Professor Julian Croft's first and only successful student. A few weeks later, Aliner Vance read a small article in the newspaper. It reported that an elephant in the city's zoological gardens had suddenly trampled and killed an Englishman. The newspaper noted that the elephant was normally a gentle and calm animal, but the man had apparently been provoking it. The name of the Englishman was Julian Croft. As one of Aliner's former guests later remarked, if he was trying to teach that elephant German irregular verbs, he probably got what he deserved.